And this is the Entheogenesis Australis live webcast, the third in the series leading up to December's Garden States event. And you just saw Jamie Rickord in conversation with Ms. Guidance at Nimbin at the up at the Hemp Embassy there. Jamie, some questions now. We've got some questions. Cannabis is now considered a medicine, at least on paper in Australia, but there's still a long way to go to reducing stigma associated with this medicine. How do you feel we could better address the stigma associated with this medicine and broaden access to the general public?
Good question. I think we just keep doing what we're doing to address stigma. I think, the cannabis plant is an extremely effective and potent medicine, but it challenges a lot of sort of paradigms in how it works. But I think this process just has to move slowly because, there's stigma and then there's a lot of unconscious stigma as well. And that's very hard to address. And in terms of access, I think it's changing day by day. More and more people are doing it, but I think the real trick is that more and more doctors need to understand how effective it is and start prescribing it. And then through that, I think more and more avenues will open up. And I hope, we end up with a system a bit like Canada where, more recreational access follows medicalisation. And I think that applies to sort of a lot of the sort of plants and plant medicines, whether that's cannabinoids or psychedelics. We're up against, they did a really good number on these medicines over the last 50 years. And it will probably be a generation until that's completely been removed, I think. Yeah.
So in terms of other traditional medicines or entheogens, what do you feel that cannabis offers that those other ones don't? What are the sorts of, what's special about cannabis, I guess?
I think they all have a place at different times. We have this endocannabinoid system, which the phytocannabinoids are really effective at treating. You think about entheogens, tryptamines, serotonin's a tryptamine. We don't call it the endotryptamine system, but that's effectively what it is. These kind of natural products, natural medicines that occur in nature, are very potent in the human body. And I say this a lot, until humans can design these, we shouldn't really be thinking we know more than nature about treating them. And we've evolved over millions of years alongside nature. So it makes total sense to me that all of these plant-based medicines were really, they evolved alongside us and they're there to help us. I suppose they'll treat different things. Cannabinoids are really effective at treating a myriad of different health conditions. There's a lot of interesting work in the US using cannabinoids as a kind of more of a psychedelic sort of therapy for breaking down dissociation or using them in certain health conditions. And then the flip to that, psilocybin can be used as a macrodose for a psychedelic experience, but the molecule is virtually identical to serotonin. So it's not a stretch to understand why microdoses of psilocybin can be used to treat depression and other mental health conditions. So I think we've just got it really wrong. And the science is actually there to prove that. What we need to do is break down stigma, and then more and more people start to use them medically, and then one by one the story is going to change. I think cannabis is an amazing plant, not just for its medicinal properties, it's a biofuel, construction material, fuel, food. And I really do believe that, in 20 years' time, people will be looking back at what's been going on under Prohibition and the war on drugs and just, they'll just shake their heads. It's like, what on earth were they doing, yeah, so I think all of these plants offer very potent solutions to a lot of problems in modern society, and primarily a connection to nature, and the simple connection being that we have an endocannabinoid system and there's phytocannabinoids. So we have an endotryptamine system and there's phytotryptamines. That's a connection to nature, and that connection to nature can fix a lot of people.
This question about combining different kinds of plant medicines from Liam in the comment section. And remember, if you do have a question, drop it in the comment section now. Liam asking, do you think there's any future for therapies which combine cannabis and psychedelics, or high doses of cannabis as a psychedelic, which you sort of alluded to there, but if you'd like to elaborate.
Yes, very much so. Say if we look at the research around sort of psychedelics, a lot of standard psychiatric drugs are out. They block the response. So they have to be stopped. And the longer people are off them, the more chance those psychedelic treatment sessions will be effective. And we need a solution for that. And in my mind, that's what cannabinoids can do very, very effectively. And yeah, high dose cannabinoids. There's a lot of interesting stuff around dissociation and, how, it came up a bit in Kelly's talk about the kind of neuroticism and how that might block the mystical experience. And, that's underpinned by anxiety or different mental health conditions that dissociation plays a role in. And if you talk to researchers in the US, they often talk about how some of the bigger psychedelics just bounce off. You hear about people falling asleep or getting nothing from the experience. So there's a lot of interesting work using cannabis in high doses to access the kind of autonomic nervous system and break that kind of dissociation down. And I think in time, we will use modern science and modern medicine to prove what has already been going on for many thousands of years on this planet. So I think they can be used in combination. I think there's a lot of fascinating reading around, the research protocols look at one or the other, and that's very much part of research and legalization, let's say, of sort of psychedelic medicine and cannabinoid medicine. But I think in time we'll see that we can use different ones for different things, different bits, whether that's more trauma-based therapies, more depression-based, anxiety. So I think, it's going to take a long time, but eventually all of these compounds will be used masterfully to help people get better in a modern context. And I think, psychotherapy, for instance, is a very, if you think about the principles, it's a very modern view of ancient traditions, be that sort of shamanism or, Eastern mystical technologies, and, coming back to homeostasis, balance, presence, reconnecting with dissociated parts or bits that are broken off us, they're all kind of speaking from the same songbook, really. And I think this process is heading down that road where we will be able to use these medicines in a Western framework that fits for a Western psyche and a Western society that currently doesn't accept them as medicines.
So what are some of the main stumbling blocks at the moment to maximising the benefits of this as a medicine?
Cannabinoids, you mean?
Cannabinoids.
Yeah, it's a cumbersome process to get approved. There are once you know what you're doing, I've kind of got my systems down, but there aren't many doctors like me, I think, who are fully invested in providing these medicines to people. So it's access, cost, for sure, cost. The reality of the cost is if it's done right, it probably costs between $3 and $5 a day, which for some people is unaffordable, but for a lot of people it's not unaffordable. But people tend to be a bit stunned by having the investment of buying 2 or 3 months worth of medicine up front. And I think understanding as well. I think a lot of doctors just prescribe CBD and nothing happens. And then they say, oh, cannabinoids don't work. And it really just shows a total lack of understanding of, manipulation of the endocannabinoid system, let's say, using phytocannabinoids. And a lot of doctors, they're not prepared to try new things, I suppose, is a nice way of putting it. It's controversial stuff. It's been illegal for so long. There's a lot of stigma, and I think that needs to change. I mean, I notice it a lot. There's a lot of people that are very pro psychedelic medicine, for instance, and they kind of turn their nose up at cannabinoids, and I find that a bit, it's a bit silly. They're all plant-based, natural medicines that are amazingly potent at making humans better, and they're all sort of part of a bigger picture. Stigma, access, but we are getting there. Australia, with the special access scheme, we're way ahead of many countries in the world. It's not like this in the US. Canada's a bit different. It is changing slowly. It would be nice if it changed quicker, though, for a lot of people.
Would be very nice. This question from Liam in the comments, who was asking, what's the deal with Delta 8 THC, which Liam says he's been seeing a lot about in stories in social media lately. So Delta 8 THC, Delta H.
This is a really fascinating topic. Minor cannabinoids, how they're working. I don't know much about how they work. The medicines I prescribe don't have big doses of minor cannabinoids. So I'm kind of working with CBD, THC, and terpenes, and sort of trying to tease out how all of that works in different people. Anecdotally, I've spoken to lots of people who've spent time in Colorado, and they're a bit kind of, I don't know about CBG or Delta H THC. I didn't, and they use big doses of them, and they didn't really think that there was much in it. The science isn't really there. But I think from a botanical perspective, it's fascinating because a lot of these minor cannabinoids are further up the synthesis chain. So currently people are growing crops to maturity because that's where they extract the CBD and THC, so they get the most bang for their buck. But in that growth process is all the minor cannabinoids in higher amounts. So I think over the next few years, as it gets easier to grow it legally, people will cease the growth cycle earlier and then extract minor cannabinoids from them. And then I think, I compare cannabis a bit to wine sometimes, even though wine's not a medicine. Different altitudes, different soils, different parts of the world, the same grape is completely different. So I think there's this vast untapped resource in the plant, depending on where it's grown and how it's grown and what stage of growth has ceased. But that is, this is really well after prohibition has ended for that to become financially viable in the legal model anyway. So I think the jury's out still. And I would love to be able to prescribe medicines that reliably contain higher concentrations of minor cannabinoids, but I can't. So I can't really say much more than that. CBD and THC are enough, though. It's an infinite combination of two molecules with the terpenes. That will keep anyone busy for a lot of years. So
maybe if you want to dream forward a little bit on the future of cannabis as a medicine in Australia, what sort of scenario would you like to see? How should it be working in an ideal scenario, say in 10 years' time or 15 years' time?
Easy to access. There's two things. One, at the moment, you need to be sick to access it. And I don't, I think it'd be nice if people could access it if they're not sick to help themselves feel better. But that's getting towards sort of recreational or full legalization. And I think we'll be there in 10 years' time, without a doubt. I think one of the things that will come through I think, flowers, for instance, will get much more medical strains, I call them. So there are certain strains, certain indicas that people can vape that really they're out for sleep. Bang, you're asleep. There's no recreation in it. It's asleep. Whereas there are other ones that are a bit less effective at treating insomnia. So I think the medical strains will become more medical, and then this other side will open up. But I think as well, the deliveries will change medically. So we'll get aerosols or machines that people can use to inhale. So rather than vaping flower, which I think is probably not a bad thing, because there's just a whole bunch of doctors who will never prescribe cannabis flower to their patients ever. Doesn't matter if there's stigma or not, they won't do it. So that kind of, fast onset, high peak effect side of the plant will only be accessed through medical technology, I suppose. And I think other routes of delivery, patches, suppositories, topicals legally, in the legal model. So I think there's this whole avenue for the medicalization of the plant that's really, we haven't scratched the surface. But alongside that, I would like to see all of us have the ability to grow this plant and other plants in our gardens, which ties into kind of making nature illegal. The fact is there's libraries of knowledge to be gained from some of these plants that can grow in our gardens, and it's a bit absurd that they're still banned or they are banned. And I think that needs to change. And I think with time, there'll be more and more people working in the healthcare space who really, really know how to use these medicines very effectively to treat people. But I think it shouldn't always have to be accessed through that route.
Shana just mentioning in the comments that she's on medicinal cannabis, and the biggest barriers for her are the cost, not being able to drive when on the medicine, and trying to explain why psychotropic medications are not a good option. And just on that second one, Shana, not being able to drive, I know that in a few states that issue is being addressed, at least slightly. This is cannabis being notorious for sticking around in people's sampleable saliva for days. I think there was a case a couple of years ago with 8 days. Somebody had a joint 8 days prior to being tested, and it came up positive, and that was then a charge for not driving under the influence. It's a separate charge of driving with a detectable amount, which is unfortunately still a charge that people can be charged with. There are campaigns against that at the moment. Here in Victoria, there's hopefully going to be some law changes around that, so it's slowly being addressed. But you're right, Shana, it's a massive barrier for a lot of people who are on medical cannabis currently. What do you think about the idea that cannabis is a gateway drug?
I love this question. It's bollocks, isn't it? Basically, to put it bluntly. I think it can be a gateway drug for healing, and it can be a gateway drug to using other plant medicines in time. But this whole idea that, blaming the plant is just naive. It's, people with trauma, basically. And this is another piece of stigma that just needs to be, filed in the annals of stupid bits of history, because it's just not true. If people are shooting holes in themselves with THC, there's something else going on. It's not the plant's fault. So I think that needs to change.
Yep, agreed. Liam also asking a question just on a regional question, I suppose. Is it easier living in Nimbin or harder to prescribe cannabis as a GP, living in and around that area with the long association and history?
It's a good question. I think there's wider acceptance. I'm pretty busy, and a lot of people want to use cannabinoids to treat themselves. So I think that's an advantage of being in this region. But then this region is also has a long history of kind of alternative lifestyle, counterculture. So that's you kind of cop that side of it as well. So yeah, I don't think it's no easier here than it is in any other part of New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria. And, like I said, I have lots of patients, but there is the other side, which is, people wanting access, without having to talk to me or another doctor, which I understand. But that's just going to take some more time. And we're just all slowly stepping towards, I think, the society we all would like to live in. Bit by bit.
Unless there's any more questions that people want to drop into the... Oh, hang on, Liam has just dropped another one in. If there was another entheogenic plant you could work with legally, what would it be and why would you choose that plant?
Gosh, that's a good question. Can I pick a fungus first? I think psilocybin would be the easiest route from this point. And then after that, I think, DMT, two naturally occurring tryptamines. That's how I see it with, like I said earlier, endocannabinoids, phytocannabinoids, endotryptamines, phytotryptamines. So that would be the most obvious way to go from this point in a perfect world. But, we don't live in a perfect world. So, when psychedelic medicine does become legal, a lot of it will be synthetic. It has to be to reach GMP kind of standard. So, that's another hornet's nest that I don't want to poke right now. So, but they'd be the obvious two for sure. Naturally occurring tryptamines.
And that's out of questions unless anybody wants to drop one in right now. Otherwise, Jamie, thank you very much for being here for our Q&A tonight and for your presentation earlier.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
So that's just about it for this evening. Again, do find us on entheogenesis.org. Garden States for the information about the December event, which is on the first weekend of December. It has moved from October, but all the information is there. Sign up for the newsletter and follow us on social media.